1. The knock came just after dawn, sharp and unexpected, cutting clean through the stillness that wrapped the ranch every morning. Caleb Mercer paused mid-motion, one boot half-laced, listening as if the sound might explain itself. Nobody came out this way unless they were lost, desperate, or both. He crossed the room, floorboards creaking under his weight, and pulled the door open to a slice of pale sunrise and cold air. A woman stood on the porch, shoulders squared like she'd practiced holding herself together. Dust clung to the hem of her worn coat, and her hair was pulled back tight, not a strand out of place despite the long road behind her. Her eyes met his without flinching, gray, steady, carrying exhaustion she hadn't allowed to bend her spine. "I was told you need a cook," she said, voice calm but edged with something like resolve, as if she'd rehearsed the sentence until it no longer shook. Caleb blinked, thrown off by the plainness of it. He hadn't told anyone that, not out loud. The truth was, he barely cooked at all anymore. Beans, bread, whatever could be eaten without thinking. He opened his mouth to ask who'd sent her, or why she'd come so early, but then he noticed movement behind her. A small figure shifted, half hidden by the woman's skirt. A little girl, no more than 7 or 8, peered around cautiously. Her boots were scuffed down at the toes, far too big for her feet, and she clutched a dented tin lunch pail with both hands like it was the only solid thing in the world. One braid had come loose, wisps of hair brushing her cheek. Her eyes, dark and watchful, flicked up to Caleb's face and then away, as if she'd already decided it was safer not to look too long. Something in his chest tightened, sharp and sudden. Caleb hadn't heard a child's footsteps on this porch in years. Not since sickness had hollowed out the house and taken his wife with it, leaving echoes behind. He swallowed, gripping the doorframe a little harder than necessary. He started, then stopped. The woman waited, not filling the silence, not apologizing for it. The wind stirred dust around her boots, tugged gently at the girl's loose braid. "What's your name?" he asked instead, surprising himself. "Mara," the woman replied. She placed a hand lightly on the girl's shoulder, grounding her. "And this is Lily." Lily didn't speak. She only nodded once, small and precise, like she'd learned not to waste gestures. Caleb nodded back, feeling suddenly aware of how empty the house looked behind him. One chair pulled out, yesterday's coffee cup still on the table, the quiet stretched thin and brittle. He thought of the note pinned to the mercantile board in town weeks ago, written in his own hand, hesitant and smudged, looking for someone to help with meals. Room available. He'd almost torn it down the same day, embarrassed by the admission of need. "Did someone tell you about the place?" he asked. Mara's lips pressed together briefly before she answered. "The man at the feed store said you might be willing. Said you were fair." Fair. The word landed heavier than it should have. Caleb shifted his weight, glancing past them toward the long road cutting through the fields. Whatever story had brought them here, it wasn't a short one. The girl's grip tightened on her lunch pail, knuckles whitening. Caleb noticed how she stood slightly sideways, ready to retreat if needed. He recognized that stance. He'd worn it himself once, after the funeral, when people came by with casseroles and pity and questions he couldn't answer. Without fully deciding to, he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Well," he said, voice rough but steady, "it's cold out here. You'd better come in." Mara searched his face for a long second, weighing something he couldn't see. Then she nodded once and guided Lily forward. As they crossed the threshold, Caleb felt it, a subtle shift, like air moving into a room that had been sealed too long. The floor creaked under unfamiliar steps, and for the first time in years, the sound didn't hurt. He closed the door behind them, unaware that with that simple motion, the quiet of his life had begun to crack point two. Mara did not ask where anything was. She set her coat on the back of a chair, knelt to unbutton Lily's jacket, and then moved into the kitchen as if guided by instinct rather than familiarity. Caleb stood awkwardly near the doorway, unsure whether to offer help or stay out of the way. The house felt suddenly smaller, not crowded exactly, just awake. She rolled up her sleeves, revealing hands roughened by work, not age. From her satchel she drew a small bundle of groceries, onions, a sack of flour tied with twine, a bit of salt pork wrapped in paper gone thin. "I hope you don't mind," she said, already inspecting the stove. "Didn't know what you had." "That's fine," Caleb replied. The truth was he hadn't shopped properly in weeks. He watched her light the burner with a practiced flick, the flame blooming obediently. The sound, fire catching, felt intimate, almost intrusive, like laughter in a church. Lily hovered near the table, eyes tracking her mother's movements. When Mara nodded, Lily climbed onto a chair and set her lunch pail down carefully, opening it with reverence. Inside were 3 mismatched tin plates and a handful of utensils wrapped in cloth. She began setting the table, counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3, she paused, glanced up at Caleb, uncertain. Just the 2 of us, he said gently. You can put the 3rd away. Lily hesitated, then shook her head. Mama says it's good to be ready, she murmured, placing the last plate down anyway. Mara's hand stilled for just a moment at the stove. She didn't turn around. She likes things prepared, she said softly. Caleb nodded, understanding more than the word said. He took a seat, folding his hands, unsure where to rest his eyes. The smell of onions hitting hot grease filled the room, rich and grounding. It stirred memories he hadn't invited, his wife humming low, the way she'd scold him for sneaking tastes before supper. He swallowed and focused on the present, the scrape of Lily's chair, the rhythm of Mara's knife on the cutting board. A spoon slipped from Lily's fingers and struck the floor with a sharp clatter. The sound echoed too loudly. Lily froze, breath caught, eyes wide as if bracing for something unseen. Caleb pushed his chair back and crouched, retrieving the spoon. It's all right, he said, holding it out to her. We drop things here, all the time. She stared at him, then at the spoon, as though testing the truth of it. Slowly, she took it. Thank you, she whispered. Mara turned then, relief flickering across her face before she masked it with a small smile. Lily, she said, why don't you wash your hands? Lily slid down and patted off. The room felt quieter without her careful breathing. You didn't have to say that, Mara said, not accusing, just honest. I wanted to, Caleb replied. He rubbed his neck. Houses been too quiet, makes noises sound louder than they should. Mara nodded. I know that kind of quiet. They worked in companionable silence after that. Caleb fetched plates, filled the kettle, followed simple instructions without being asked. When Lily returned, Mara showed her how to tear bread evenly, praising her for steady hands. Lily glowed at that, shoulders lifting just a little. They ate together, soup thick with onions and pork, bread warm and rough. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. Lily ate carefully, savoring each bite, while Mara watched her with an expression that mixed pride and vigilance. Caleb realized then that every small thing, the food, the warmth, the lack of raised voices, was being measured for safety. So, Mara said at last, wiping her hands. The room you mentioned. Caleb stood. This way. He led them down the hall to the door he hadn't opened in months. Dust lay thin on the handle. He hesitated, then turned it. Sunlight spilled in, catching motes in the air. A simple bed, a dresser, a window looking out over the fields. It's not much, he said. Mara stepped inside, eyes softening. Lily peeked around the doorframe, then rushed to the window. Mama, she breathed, you can see forever. Mara laughed quietly, the sound careful but genuine. She met Caleb's gaze. We don't need much, she said. Just a place that doesn't push us back out. Caleb nodded. For the first time in a long while, he felt the house exhale. 3. By the time the sun sank low behind the rolling hills, the ranch had taken on a warmth it hadn't known in months. The air smelled of cooking, wood smoke, and faint traces of the land itself, dry grass, sun-baked soil, and the sharp tang of the river nearby. Caleb leaned against the doorway of the kitchen, watching Mara and Lily move about with an easy rhythm that felt almost unreal after so much solitude. Mara was sweeping the floor, the broom flicking dust into neat corners, while Lily hummed softly as she washed dishes, tiny hands soapy and determined. Caleb's gaze softened as he saw Lily tilt her head, examining a plate as if it were a puzzle. She looked up at her mother for approval. Mara's eyes crinkled in a small, warm smile. Perfect, she said, and the relief in her tone was palpable. It was a simple word, but in that moment, it felt like a promise that things could be right again, even if only for a while. The widowed cowboy felt an unfamiliar tension ease from his shoulders. The empty house he had inherited from grief and quiet was alive again, not just with steps and voices, but with small, subtle life. Lily's laughter bubbled out as she splashed a little too enthusiastically with water, and Mara scolded her gently, a note of fondness hidden under the words. Caleb leaned back against the doorframe and allowed himself a quiet smile. It had been too long since he'd seen someone laugh without worry or hesitation in this house. Supper was simple but satisfying, stew thick with vegetables, bread still warm from the oven, and the faint sweetness of honey Mara had brought along. They ate together, the three of them, at a table that suddenly felt complete. Caleb noticed Lily's careful movements, how she placed her spoon just so, how she sat up straighter than she ever had before. Mara watched her daughter over the rim of her cup, pride and something softer mingling in her gaze. When the meal was finished, Lily rested her chin on folded arms, eyelids heavy. Mara chuckled quietly and whispered to her, "Time for bed, little one." Lily yawned and let herself be lifted, small arms around her mother's neck. Caleb opened the spare room door, the one he had kept closed since his wife's passing. Dust motes danced in the fading light. Mara carried Lily inside, and the girl's eyes widened at the simple, sunlit space. "It's perfect," Lily murmured, her small voice echoing off the walls. She climbed onto the bed, her curls tumbling over her shoulders, and tucked herself under the blankets. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lily's face, and whispered softly, "Sleep tight, my brave girl." Caleb lingered in the doorway, watching the quiet intimacy of the moment, feeling something he hadn't allowed himself in years, hope. The wind outside whispered against the cabin walls, but, inside, the ranch was a sanctuary of warmth and life. Mara straightened and turned to Caleb, her eyes meeting his. "I think we'll be all right here," she said, her voice carrying the weight of past struggles and the relief of finding safety. Caleb nodded slowly, his own throat tight with unspoken acknowledgement. He had lived too long in silence, and now that silence had transformed, it had shape, presence, and expectation. Night fell quickly over the plains, stars appearing like pinpricks of light against an endless dark canvas. Caleb went to the porch, taking a deep breath of the crisp night air, listening to the low murmur of the river and the distant calls of night birds. For the first time in years, the house behind him was not a memory of loss, but a living, breathing home. The laughter, the soft footsteps, the faint aroma of stew, all of it lingered in his senses like a promise. Back inside, Mara tucked Lily in once more and gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead. "We're home," she whispered. The girl murmured in response, already drifting toward dreams. Mara turned toward Caleb, an unspoken question in her eyes. He simply nodded, a small, reassuring smile on his face. Together, they closed the door, shutting out the cold night and letting the warmth of shared life fill the space. Caleb realized then that this quiet, this house, had been waiting, not for him alone, but for them all. And as he finally settled into the old rocking chair by the fire, he felt the house exhale with him, no longer empty, no longer lonely. It waited for the mornings filled with laughter, the meals shared, the small hands brushing against his as they moved about the kitchen. The quiet was gone, replaced with something infinitely better. Hope, resilience, and the unspoken promise that they had found, in each other, a place to belong.